Welcome to Her Own Boss, the podcast created by graduates to help young women find their inner entrepreneur. I'm your host Nikki, and today I'm joined by Kate Bache, chemist turned marketeer turned entrepreneur. Kate has founded two businesses, Kind Organic, which puts sustainability and ethics at the heart of women's menstruation products, and Health in Her, which cuts through the confusion often associated with going through the menopause by offering hand-picked products and expertise. In this episode, Kate tells us about the uncertainty she felt trying to choose a career after uni, the differences between men and women when it comes to confidence, and the 3-step philosophy she follows when assessing a job opportunity. Hope you enjoy. Hi, Kate.
Hi, how's it going?
Hey, good, thanks. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. Yeah, not too bad at all.
Well, thank you so much for kind of agreeing to come on the podcast and taking the time. We really appreciate it. So to get started and to help our listeners get to know you a little bit more, we've got 3 quickfire questions. So I'm just going to rattle them out and just say the first thing that comes to your mind, all right?
Okay.
So if you could fill a room with anything, what would you fill it with?
Chocolate.
Chocolate, I love that. What song, movie, or book always puts you in a good mood?
Love Actually.
Oh, yes. And where's the first place you want to go on holiday as soon as we're allowed?
The Alps.
Oh, the Alps. Very nice. Is that somewhere you go often?
Yeah, my husband loves skiing, so but we haven't done a summer holiday there yet, so we're keen to go and enjoy the summer and have some mountain air.
Yeah. Well, hopefully you get to do that soon.
Yeah, I hope so too. So,
Kate, I know you've had a lot of past experience, which I guess helped you come up with the idea for Kind Organic, from working for Reckitt Benckiser on brands like Clearasil, E45 and Veet, which were quite functional products, and then later on working for Pepsi and Kellogg's in the natural innovation space. I guess this built a foundation for you to then launch a business that provides a natural and eco-friendly option in the feminine hygiene market. But how did you come up with the idea for Health in Her, and why did you decide to make that a separate entity?
Yeah, good question. So that the journey with Kind Organic was quite tumultuous, so always lots of ups and downs. And in particular, I think there were a few downs and situations where I felt like I needed to pivot and really change the idea. One particular occasion, I was waiting to hear that we'd gained a listing in Boots, which is obviously really exciting for a small brand.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, they delayed it by 6 months, which just shot my plans out of the water, really. And at that point, I just felt like I needed to have a good backup plan. And that backup plan was selling more directly to users as opposed to going through a retailer. And very quickly from there, started doing some consumer research and found that menopause in particular was even more acutely felt than PMS symptoms. So decided that was a really good place to start the website with menopause, and then hopefully to expand into menstrual health and other female health conditions later on.
Yeah, I love that. And the first time we spoke, you kind of mentioned that in doing that customer research, you found that a lot of women were suffering in silence when it came to the menopause and menstruation. And I think that's so true because I'm a woman and I have truly never had a conversation about the menopause. So I love that it's happening for the first time over a podcast.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's funny, isn't it? Because I'm 38 now, so I'm not quite there yet. But it's something that we've probably all been touched by, our mums or our aunties or friends, and possibly without us knowing as well. It might have been that your mum was particularly moody or had been suffering with symptoms, and yeah, I think there is a whole generation of women that are still suffering in silence now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that kind of brings out something that we really want to achieve with this podcast series in general, is just to highlight how important it is to have representation in entrepreneurship and across industries, because that's how you get the solutions which will benefit the most amount of people. But before we go kind of deeper into your experiences as an entrepreneur, could you tell us where you went to uni and what you studied?
Yeah, I went to Bath University and I studied a master's in chemistry.
And what made you choose chemistry?
You know what? I had no idea what I wanted to do. So at A level, I did, if I remember now, chemistry, maths, and economics. And yeah, just I suppose all quite big, broad subjects. I didn't, unlike a few of my friends that felt they had a calling to go and study medicine or be a pharmacist, I just didn't feel that I knew what I wanted to do. So I felt that it was a good idea to go for a subject that I was enjoying and I was quite good at. So yeah, it felt like the right choice at the time. And yeah, I don't regret it at all. I think the one thing that is easy to get hung up on is what do I do? And I think the one big kind of ethos that I've always stood by is just go and do something. And yeah, as long as you know that you can come out the other end, and you still have choices. That's the most important thing. And even if you do something that you dislike, you've really learned something along the way. So I think, yeah, that was, even though I didn't end up working in chemistry, I think it's given me a good basis to go into business. And I think it's probably one of those degrees that gives you a nice kind of rounding, on all different aspects, from kind of analytical skills right through to kind of creativity. So yeah, that was a interesting experience, as well, that I had during that time. I worked for AstraZeneca on, in organic chemistry in a lab, and that was a really good learning for me because I knew that I didn't want to work in a lab for the rest of my life. So that was a good example of, yeah, doing something that made you feel a bit uncomfortable with, but then kind of coming out the other end and being glad for that experience. So
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I studied psychology at uni purely because I did a psychology course in my last year of high school, and I thought, oh yeah, this is fun. I'll go ahead and do that. So yeah, I definitely agree that at that age you might not know what you want to do, but I no way do I regret doing
yeah.
psych as my degree either. Um, so kind of after that work experience with AstraZeneca, did you have a better idea of what you wanted to do after uni? Did you kind of struggle to find a job that felt right to you?
Yeah, definitely. I did know a bit, definitely a bit better what I wanted to do. So as part of my masters, I did a small dissertation on the aspects of that business. So just looking at it as a whole, and did a big presentation on that. And I think, yeah, it was really looking at it from a much more commercial perspective that made me realize I'm probably a bit better suited to business. I'm definitely more of an extrovert than a lot of the scientists were that I was working with. So it just felt like a better fit for me overall as well. And then interestingly, when I completed my degree, I still didn't really know what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to look at more kind of business, side of things. So at that point, I suppose I kind of made the connection between pharmaceutical and business and went into pharmaceutical sales, which again I really disliked, but as a job, but just because I'm not a salesy person really. But again, it just gave me an insight to other aspects of that business. So marketing, for example, was something that I was really interested in, and then subsequently, that's the direction I went into.
And your first job after uni wasn't actually a grad scheme, was it? You joined one a little bit later?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so I had, probably just over a year of, yeah, working in the pharmaceutical sales job. Yeah, so that wasn't a grad scheme at all. And yeah, it was, I suppose, interesting that, as I went for the grad scheme, yeah, there was, I suppose I was, amongst people that were probably a little bit younger than me, but I felt like just having that year of just doing something, even though I didn't love that job, it gave me, I felt it gave me a small edge, to a certain extent, of just having that experience. Um, and yeah, I certainly wasn't afraid of going on the grad scheme because I just knew that the training involved in that would have been, would be incredible. So it was, yeah, it was really exciting to get onto that grad scheme. It was a really tough, process actually. I hope
Hmm.
they don't do interviews like that these days, but it was a bit like, it was a bit like X Factor, where you had to, the first stage, a whole big group of people had to go into one room, and another group of people
Oh
went to
my
the other room,
goodness.
and you only found out at that point whether you were going to stay or going to go. So
Oh
yeah,
wow.
it was a pretty, harsh, recruitment, yeah, procedure, but yeah, obviously well worth it in the end.
Yeah, definitely. And so how was your experience working for that company during the grad scheme? What do you feel like it gave you in terms of extra skills?
Well, I think first and foremost, it gave me a really good grounding in marketing and business. I suppose consumer goods in particular are, I suppose, for me, one of the most pure forms of marketing that you can do. The company itself had a huge focus on TV and print marketing. So, yeah, really exciting, fast moving, as in the name, fast moving consumer goods. Um, I think the other really interesting thing about the company is that company is very lean. So Reckitt Benckiser, it's just notoriously has quite a lean structure, and it's successfully, I think it's possibly the most successful company in that sector in the last 20 years. So they've had 20 years of double-digit growth,
Wow.
which is incredible, really. And yeah, so a great place to learn my trade. And what was also really exciting for me was they put marketeers at the core of the business. So the way that they describe a brand manager is essentially like being the CEO of your own brand. So these were brands that were, for example, doing sales of 30 million revenue. So really big businesses, and there might only be you as the kind of main brand manager on that brand. So yeah, huge amount of experience, really thrown in at the deep end, but really exciting, and yeah, a fantastic place to have like really learned about business and how it operates.
Yeah, and I guess that experience as well shows that being a CEO is kind of a mindset over just a job title. So you obviously weren't the CEO of any of these brands, but kind of acting that way really gave you that experience and that taste of what it's like.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think that's probably what gave me the passion to start my own business as well. I remember quite distinctly a day where I think I'd given a big presentation to lots of different departments on the strategy that for the next year. And I was probably only about 25 at that point, maybe 24. And I just remember thinking, if I can do that on a brand that is this big, there's no reason why I can't go and start my own business. And I think that's probably where the initial seed of becoming an entrepreneur started, really.
Yeah, definitely. And so I love this next bit of your story. So the other day you said that after working for this company for a few years, you had an early midlife crisis, or I guess what you could call a quarter life crisis as well. So how did that feel, and what did you do next that kind of brought you to where you are today as an entrepreneur?
Yeah, good question. So it was, probably a third midlife crisis. So I was just approaching my 30th birthday, and had a birthday party. And yeah, it was. I suppose I'd been working really hard for a number of years for that company. So as well as being a great place to learn your trade, it was also a really challenging job, long hours. And I suppose I just felt tired, really, and I wanted something to change. So I'd been at the company about 6 years at that point, and yeah, so I decided to start looking for something else. I wanted a complete change, and I felt a overwhelming feeling of wanting to do something more altruistic. And at that point, I managed to set up a volunteer placement with Save the Children in Delhi in India, and I went back to ask Reckitt Benckiser to say, would you support me, or would you give me a sabbatical basically and keep my job open? And to my surprise, they said yes, because they don't normally do that. So that was good news. Yeah, and probably one of the best decisions I've ever made. Really just was the perfect antidote for, I suppose, being tired of the kind of daily grind, really. So yeah, just complete culture shock, a fantastic experience, and just opened my eyes to, I think, probably like just the rest of the world, really. It just felt like yeah, I was just learning every day. Even just going outdoors was sometimes challenging, so yeah, no, it's a really great experience.
And how important was all of this experience in kind of leading to you becoming an entrepreneur? And what do you think that kind of catalyst moment was?
Yeah, I suppose it's funny when you look back. There's so many different things that contribute to that thinking. So I think the really interesting piece for me about the Save the Children role was the importance of having something that's quite ethical in what you do. I suppose with my role at Reckitt Benckiser, it felt like I was really just selling boxes of stuff. And I sometimes struggled with, the kind of the ethical side of what were we doing for the consumer. Not always. When I worked on E45 in particular, there was clearly a good outcome for people that were really struggling with things like eczema. So it wasn't always that way, but I suppose I just yeah, as I said, really had a strong urge to do something that was for the better of people, really, and yeah, so that had a really big impact on I suppose what I did when I actually became an entrepreneur. After India, actually, funnily enough, after Reckitt's agreeing to keep my job open, I decided to quit. I think I suppose once you've kind of taken that step out, you realise what else is out there. It just felt like it would have been a really big step back for me. So subsequently went to Australia, where my brother was living at the time, and I managed to get a job with Kellogg's at that point. And I found, I suppose, probably my favourite job in a big corporate, which was innovation manager. And I was basically making up new cereals, which was quite cool. But what was
That's
really
so cool.
what was really interesting for me was it was in this kind of more natural space, as I mentioned earlier. And so I felt like, yeah, there was definitely a move in the right direction to something that I more believed in. So, trying to get kids in particular to eat more healthy. So there was, a good move in the right direction. And I just loved the creativity of that job. And I think I discovered that was a really important element of any kind of career role for me at that point. Unfortunately, my mum at that point became very unwell. She was back here in Wales, and so about 2.5 years after I moved to Australia, I decided to move back to help my dad look after her. And luckily, Kellogg's at that point moved me to their European headquarters in Dublin, so I was at least a bit closer, and I could fly back and forth most weekends. So yeah, that was the reason for coming back to the UK. And then subsequently, really sadly, my mum passed away, and it was really at that point I suppose I just realised that I had an opportunity to do something I always wanted to do, and I had a feeling of there was really nothing to lose at that point. And so yeah, that was when I did just a year in Dublin with Kellogg's and decided to leave at that point. I moved back to Wales to help my dad, and yeah, just started to come up with ideas, and that's where the idea of Kind Organic came about.
And once you'd started Kind Organic, do you ever kind of wish that you had just done it sooner, like if you had started straight after uni, or do you really appreciate the experiences you had leading up to it?
Yeah, I think it's a difficult one. I think if I had more confidence, if I had the confidence I did at that age, when I was coming out of university, coupled with perhaps more kind of technological breakthroughs, because at that point we only had like dial-up, pretty much when I went to university, and we were lucky to have an email. I think I might have done it sooner. But I think I also really value the experience. So it sounds silly, but even just having a strategy document that you might have worked on a big brand, you can use that as a template. It feels like an easier starting point. But sometimes that can also hamstring you as well. So you're obviously used to doing it a certain way, and sometimes fresh ideas come out of just doing things differently. So it doesn't always work like that. And I've definitely seen a lot of successful entrepreneurs come straight out of university, or even start businesses at university as well.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a really important point there around confidence. So there's actually been some research which suggests that men are more confident than women early on in their careers, and so they're more likely to start a business earlier on than women are. So yeah, I think that's really interesting that you say that if you had the same confidence you did leaving uni, then maybe you will have tried it. But now, having experience as an entrepreneur, do you perceive there to be any differences between men and women in terms of confidence in the entrepreneurship space?
Oh, definitely. I think I think I feel imposter syndrome every day, actually. It's I don't know what it is, really. I think it's perhaps that kind of more social stereotype of, particularly that my generation grew up with, that that men were more dominant in business. Perhaps the confidence factor. I genuinely think that men just don't worry as much about things. And I think, I don't know, maybe this comes back to women perhaps being able to empathize a bit more. I think thinking about things like going for funding, for example, I do worry about the investor sat across the table from me, and am I going to be able to pay them their money back? And I worry about that. It's something that plays on my mind daily. Whereas I think, I have worked really closely with male entrepreneurs, and they definitely don't have that same level of worry going on, for sure. That doesn't mean they don't care. It just means I think they don't necessarily get so consumed by it. And tend to be, maybe they're just slightly more optimistic on that front. But I definitely, I'm not surprised to hear that fact at all. I've seen that a number of times.
And do you have any examples of when you maybe got less than you wanted, or you felt like you didn't ask for enough when pitching? So you kind of said that you always worry about asking for too much and not being able to pay it back. Do you have any examples of that?
Maybe not so much asking for not enough, but more about not having enough confidence in evaluation. So in fact, I'm having to deal with this at the moment. We're now going for our third round of funding on Health and Her. And our second round of funding was only 3 or 4 months after we started trading. And so we didn't have a huge amount of traction, and the valuation didn't significantly move on, and it should have done. And at the time, I took some advice on the valuation, and I think looking back, I should have held my own and been more confident with what we were achieving. And I suppose in a way, it's had a bit of a knock-on effect to the current valuation that we're going through. Because there's obviously, it feels like a bigger leap because that second round probably wasn't where it should have been. So I think looking back, I would have definitely have fought for a better valuation at that point and had more confidence in what we were achieving and what we were doing at that point.
Yeah. And kind of expanding on the funding point as well. So I'm going to throw some more research at you. So the British Business Bank released last year some data which suggested that for every £1 of funding that entrepreneurs received in the UK, only 1p went to businesses with all female founders. And this is obviously a huge topic, and there will be so many reasons for this. But being the founder of two very female-centric companies, do you think there's ever do you ever feel like the people that you're pitching to don't really understand the product?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's a double-edged sword, this one, actually. So I think with Kind Organic in particular, that was a really hard sell to men. And I would say the majority of investors we meet are male. However, interestingly, it was the absolute reverse with Health and Her and the subject of menopause. We actually found that men whose wives had either been through menopause or were going through menopause were incredibly receptive to that idea. So it doesn't always hold, actually, that the investor has to be the consumer. I think as long as they have some understanding of the problem, whether it be secondhand or firsthand, it's that actually works a lot in our favour. And we found in one particular pitch that the female investor in the group, who was pre-menopausal, didn't get the idea at all, but all of her fellow colleagues who were male did, and they were their wives, it turned out, had experienced everything that comes with menopause. So it's a really interesting one. I'm also familiar with, I think there's, I forget her name, but there's the TED Talk that talks about the types of questions that you get. Being, I think as a female, you do tend to get probably slightly more pessimistic type questions, so preventative questions. I've definitely experienced that type of bias, I suppose, that's happened. And I think it's a fantastic TED Talk. Hopefully you can share the link afterwards, but there's definitely good ways of getting around it. And I actually only watched it last week to help with a particular email that had a lot of preventative questions in it.
Gosh.
So so you can adjust for that. I think it's just being just acknowledging that bias exists, and then leveraging it in your favor, I think, is really key.
And what strengths do you think women have as business owners?
I think for me, it comes back to empathy. Having empathy with a consumer is so important, and being able to talk to that consumer. It's really interesting, actually, because companies like Beckett Benckiser, for example, if you imagine the majority of their products, even though some of them are designed for men are actually being bought by the female of the household, so like a mother, for example. And they, as a company, very quickly recognised that actually women understand women kind of better, and actually the majority of their sales were coming from a decision that woman is making. And excuse it is kind of obviously a social, it's still a social norm. I think that the female of the household still does the majority of the shopping, maybe less so now, but so I think there's some really interesting factors like that exist in the market to suggest that women in business can obviously better understand other women that are actually buying the product. So I think there's something really interesting about that element. But apart from that, I think there is this ability to really empathize with the user, to really listen as well. And I think they're kind of female superpowers that we need to hold on to.
Yeah, I love that, female superpowers. So what advice do you have for young women who want to start a business, or who might be entering their career and feeling a bit of imposter syndrome, like you said you feel every day?
I think my best advice would be, there's a couple of things. If you're ever just feeling a bit worried about a particular challenge that's coming up, a big presentation, an interview, I think just take confidence from what you've done before. Think back to the last time you felt like that and what happened and what did you achieve. Take confidence from you overcoming previous challenges, even if they're smaller, that's fine. I think there's definitely an element of that, and writing them down sometimes really helps as well, because you can just read that piece of paper before you go into that interview or before you go into the presentation and just remember and have those positive thoughts. I think the only other thing really is about preparedness. I think obviously experience really helps with being prepared. I think I've probably pitched my business now more than 300 or 400 times, so I can talk to someone in great detail about my business with no problem. But obviously the first time I ever did that was hard, and but what I had to do was just really be prepared and practice. And I think where perhaps you might be lacking in experience, just practice and be prepared in order to give yourself that confidence. And then randomly, just the other thing that weirdly, I'm trying to put my finger on why it makes me feel confident, is just weirdly doing sport for me makes me feel confident, and just must be the endorphins or something that really help me clarify my thoughts, and perhaps even just going out for a run or a walk. When I've got a problem or something I'm worried about, I do tend to do that, and it just helps me clear my mind. So that's just probably just a snippet, a snippet of my life really, of what I'm doing. But it definitely helps me kind of gain confidence and clarify my thoughts.
Yeah, and you mentioned earlier that you kind of watched a TED Talk recently to help with an experience that you're going through. Are there any other resources, maybe books that you read when you feel like you need a bit of inspiration or a bit of help?
Yeah, I'm reading a book at the moment actually called The Discomfort Zone, which I'm enjoying. I think with all things really, it's nice to hear that other women are going through like challenging times and overcoming it. Yeah, I think that's really good. There's another book called Disrupt, and I forget the author. Apologies. Hopefully we can give you a link afterwards. And that book was actually such a great book for me. So when I just left Kellogg's and I was trying to find the right idea to launch my first business, my best friend from school sent me this book, and it literally would take you 5 to 10 minutes to work through. It's kind of like a workbook to clarify how you want to disrupt the world, basically. And the one thing I always remember from that book is there's 3 things you kind of need to think about when you're choosing your career or a business or what you want to do in life. One is choose something that you're good at, which is hopefully quite obvious. Choose something that you love doing.
Yeah.
So I think, for me at that point, I love just being creative and doing, creating things and seeing them seeing a product on a shelf for the first time is pretty exciting. And the third thing is do something you're really passionate about, something you care about. And it was really at that point that, obviously, again, just looking back at my experience in Save the Children and thinking that I want to do something that helps people, better for the environment perhaps, or better for people's health. That was an important factor for me as well. And I think that I kind of had a number of ideas, and Kind Organic in particular just ticked all 3 boxes really well. And so that was a really great book and perfect timing for me.
Yeah, I think that's such good advice. And I also like how you kind of reference your past experiences there, because it's not it's not as if you knew the answers to those 3 points kind of as soon as you wanted to start a career. It might take time to kind of get there and figure out what those 3 things are for you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I remember thinking, when I landed the job in Kellogg's in Australia, I thought to myself, right, I've finally found a job I really genuinely love. And at that point, I was, in my early 30s. It took me, probably 12 years of getting there from, finishing school to that point. I think it's I always felt like there were stepping stones, and you can always find nice connections from one job to the next, and it's things that I suppose make you feel maybe a little bit more secure and a little bit more confident going from one role to the next. So when I worked in pharmaceutical sales, for example, I then went to work, pharmaceutical in chemistry for AstraZeneca. I then subsequently worked for a pharmaceutical in their business side of things. So I felt like at least I knew the industry, I knew the myth of the business as such. And I suppose throughout my career, I've always tried to make those connections. So you're not making a huge leap from one thing to another. So it's an easier route, but you're learning along the way about what you like and what you dislike. And I suppose learning what you dislike is as valuable as learning what you like as well. So when you look at it that way, it's you've really got nothing to lose, actually.
Definitely, I completely agree. And I just have one more question for you. What gives you confidence?
This is a really tough one. Yeah, I think probably just going back to looking back to what you've achieved and giving yourself a pat on the back, and probably discussing that with others as well, loved ones. And there's absolutely no harm in doing that. I think that gives great confidence hopefully in every aspect of life, and just really looking at your achievements and taking that forward, really.
Yeah, perfect. Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast and kind of sharing your story with me. Really appreciate it. If you're about to pitch for a job or a business for the first time, and like Kate, you're needing a bit of a confidence boost, then check back here tomorrow for a 10-minute mini-sode on presenting yourself with confidence from one of our expert mentors. If you've enjoyed this episode, then you can find out more about us on Instagram by searching @HerOwnBossPodcast, and make sure to leave us a review and subscribe to hear the latest on finding your inner entrepreneur.